Morning Summit Church. This is Jeff Huber, lead pastor, and I am grateful to be with you. It's been a couple of weeks, or a few weeks actually. We had Thanksgiving week, and then last week I was off for a little bit of time, and I got to go to Denver to see some family. And grateful to be back with you today. As we kind of continue in this season of Advent, we are talking about a journey home and what that means for us to move towards Christmas Eve and towards home. And each week we have a different theme that we're using. This week, the theme is love. That when we journey in the season of Advent, which is the 4 weeks before we get to Christmas, we talk about usually these four things: faith, hope, peace, and love. Sometimes we include joy in there, and the idea, the image of light. And these are really important themes throughout the scriptures and really for our daily lives. And so this week, we're going to talk about love a little bit, and we're going to look at one of my favorite stories, actually, in the birth stories of Jesus. It comes from Luke's gospel. It's the story of Elizabeth and Zachariah. They are the parents of John the Baptist, excuse me, who is the cousin of Jesus. And their story is really fascinating. And their faithfulness is meant to be something that inspires us. Elizabeth and Zachariah, if you don't know their story, we find it in Luke's gospel in Luke 1, towards the second half of that chapter. And we read about these two people who are older and expect that they'll never have children. They've been childless. And that's in the first century in Judaism in particular, that was kind of seen as, by many, they would look at that and say, what did they do wrong? They must have not done what they should have been doing, or not. They should have, maybe they did something to disobey God or something. I mean, the idea was that everybody should have children, and if you didn't, it was because God maybe was upset with you. And so there may have been some that looked down upon them. But Zachariah himself was a priest. He was from what's called the order of the Levites, and so his job was to help take care of the temple and to make sure everything was done just right and all the rituals were done. And he and his wife Elizabeth, not having children, had more time to give to faith and to other things. And in this story, what happens is God comes and says, "Hey, Elizabeth, you're going to have a child." And Elizabeth comes to Zachariah and says, "We're going to have a child." And Zachariah doesn't believe her. He's like, "We're too old for this." And so he's struck literally deaf and dumb. I mean, he can't speak. He literally for the next 9 months, he's not able to talk, and until the baby is named. And eventually, when the baby is named, it's named John, which is really a different name. It's not something that their family probably would have named a child. It wasn't part of their family lineage or heritage, and yet Elizabeth said this is going to be the child's name, and it's at that moment that Zachariah is able to speak again. And here's the part that I really love about this story, and that is that immediately after that, Zachariah has this song that he sings. We call it the Song of Zachariah, or his. It's almost like it's a poem. It's a prophecy, and so we're going to read a little part of that because I love that. In First John, the very last verses come starting in verse 76. We're going to read that. I'm going to read that for you, where Zachariah says, "And you, my little son, will be called the prophet of the Most High, because you will prepare the way for the Lord." So remember, John the Baptist is the one who speaks and prepares the way for the Jesus's public ministry some 30 years after this. "You will tell his people how to find salvation through forgiveness of their sins. Because of God's tender mercy, the morning light from heaven is about to break upon us, to give light to those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, and to guide us to the path of peace." I love this image, and I love this story, and it's just a great reminder of us of how Zachariah does this loving, faithful, amazing thing as he supports his wife Elizabeth, but then as he faithfully does his duties in the temple. And these are things he would have waited years to be able to do, and yet has to forego some of them because he can't speak. And yet he remains faithful and loving. And then he has these beautiful words he speaks after his son is born, after his son receives this name of John. And we know him as John the Baptizer. And I guess here's the question I want to ask us today, and here's the thing that leads us. Are there times in your life where you felt a bit speechless? Are there times in your life where you felt like you haven't known what to say? Where maybe something has happened that you've wanted to be a part of what's going on, but you haven't been able to be, or maybe there are times where you're just not able to do the things you've always, been able to do. And for Zachariah, a big part of being the priest was speaking and the speech that was literally a part of his identity. I mean, I think about that as a pastor. So one of the reasons I love this story is because it makes me ask this question: what if I couldn't preach? What if I couldn't speak? I mean, that's, my mom has often said, it's great that you found a job where you can talk for 30 minutes straight and no one interrupts you, because from the time I was little, I was always a talker and someone who spoke a lot. And that's been a part of who I am. And so, gosh, what if I couldn't do that? What if I couldn't do the thing that I felt like God had asked me to do? And that's what happens for Zechariah. He's not able to do the thing he feels like. I mean, he feels like God has raised him up and he's named him to be a priest, and and yet he can't do those things. And yet in the middle of that, he's still loving God, loving others. He's still very faithful. So has there been a time in your life where maybe you haven't been able to do the things you thought that God wanted you to do, and yet you are invited to still be loving and faithful? Um, I think about that in terms of this Christmas season in particular. The Christmas season is one where we get caught up in the hype of the season and what, this next weekend we're going to talk about joy. And the joy of the season is meant to kind of be something that we lean into, and yet sometimes maybe we don't feel that joy for whatever reason. Maybe there's things we were hoping for this Christmas we can't do. I mean, we're not in the middle of the pandemic the way we've been. However, the pandemic is still happening around us, and we have a new variant that's come upon us. And so maybe we found ourselves stuck at home again a little bit more, or maybe we're anxious a little bit more, or maybe we're not doing the things we normally would do at Christmas for whatever reason. And sometimes that can happen. I was visiting recently with someone who, was planning on going to visit family, but because of some health issues can't do that. What are some of the things maybe you were hoping for even during this season that you're not able to do? And is there a way for you to remind yourself that part of this story, the story of Zechariah, is remaining faithful and loving God, loving others, even when we can't do what we were hoping to do, even though maybe it comes in different ways? I mean, for Zechariah, he becomes a parent later in life. I mean, here's the other thing about their story, Zechariah and Elizabeth. It says that everybody in the community was talking about them. And the reason was because this whole story seemed kind of crazy. I mean, they're not supposed to be having kids, but yet now they're blessed with a child, and she is pregnant, even though they're older. And all of a sudden he's struck, dumb. He can't talk, and yet he's a priest. And then all of a sudden he is able to talk when the baby is born, and they name the baby John, which is not a typical name. I mean, it seems like a crazy story, and people are talking about it. And yet in the middle of all that, for the most part, Zechariah is speechless. And yet when he can speak, his speech is to God, and to say, God, here's what, when I look at this baby, when I look at this infant. And here's the other thing, and the kind of last thing I want us to focus on as we think about this story. It's meant to point us towards the birth of Jesus. I mean, that's what we're going to celebrate here in this season as we get to Christmas Eve. And I love that this prophecy, this poem, this music, this song from Zechariah comes after he looks at this infant, this child of his. And, that's the other thing that I think about, and the reason I titled this, meditation, Loving When We're Speechless, because I think of the first time, we didn't see our kids when they were infants, but the first time I saw my kids as we were working through, we just finished our gotcha day. It's our, we every year celebrate the time we adopted our kids and finalized that. That happened on December 1st. And so we just kind of went through that as a family. And I think about the first time I saw my children, and I knew, even though I wasn't sure it was all going to work out and all the paperwork, and these were the children, these were our children. These are God brought us these children as a gift. And I have to tell you, I was kind of speechless. And once again, that seems, weird for me as someone who's always talked and, talking is a part of who I am. But I think sometimes it's in those speechless moments that we experience God's love and God's grace and God's mercy even most powerfully. And so here's the other question I want to ask you. Is there a way and a time for you to slow down this season and to be speechless and to know that's in the middle of that we learn who we are and whose we are? I've been visiting this week a lot with parents who we're doing a number of baptisms, though, it's Sunday after Christmas Day, because people have family in town and so forth. And every time I talk to one of these young couples that have these new children, many of them are infants or toddlers, or one of the things I tell them is the purpose of baptism is to really know that your role as parents is to remind our children they were made by God to be loved by God. And when I was doing a Zoom call with one of those couples, they had their infant with them, and all of a sudden the infant just looked into, kind of grabbed Dad by the face. And Dad looked him, and the child looked at him in the eye and smiled. And I think about how in that speechless moment where we just lock eyes, if you will, there's this idea of being made known and being loved. And one of the things that God, I think, wants us to know desperately why he came as an infant is that God made us to love us. And so even as we think about this story of Zachariah, of Elizabeth, of them looking into the eyes of their child John, of Mary and Joseph who look into the eyes of this infant Jesus, we're meant to kind of see and we're meant to be speechless and kind of recognize how much we're loved, and that God came in the form of a child to love us and in some ways make us speechless, to just stop and take a deep breath. So, and that's my hope and prayer for you this season, is that you might just stop and take a deep breath and know in that speechless moment, like Zachariah had for 9 months, like sometimes we might have this season. So here's what I'd like you to do over the next few weeks as we move towards Christmas. I'd like you to look around, kind of pick your head up and look around at things that might make you just a little speechless, that maybe you might miss if you're not paying attention. That this is a time for us to be a bit speechless and to know that in that moment we're meant to experience God's love and to express God's love. And that might happen in speechless ways, and in ways that we don't use our words even necessarily, but just our actions, our kindness towards others, in the middle of the craziness of the season, just to stop and to pause. Maybe you notice someone in your workplace or at school, or you notice someone in your family or on a Zoom call or something, and you just write them a little note, or you just do something kind for them. One of the things each day this week in the meditation moments, we did them a little bit different. By the way, our meditation moments are on our website. We did them a bit differently this week. And every day there's a spiritual formation activity. And it says, hey, maybe you could make some cookies for someone, or do something, some act of loving kindness for someone. And that might, once again, be an act of love and loving when we're speechless. I mean, is there a way you can notice that and then live into that in the days ahead? So those are just some thoughts I've had as we're thinking about this beautiful story. Once again, I encourage you to read the whole story and the whole prophecy from Zachariah, which you're going to find in Luke 1, in this story, a fascinating story of Mary and Elizabeth, who interact a bit. We find that right before this story. Mary, the mother of Jesus, and Elizabeth interact about their pregnancies, and then we have the birth of John the Baptist. If you've never read this story, I hope you'll go and read it in Luke 1. So, as we move through this season, I want to remind you, this next weekend is the third weekend of Advent. We've had some great stuff we've been able to do as a church community. And this week we have a cantata. We have a big musical event that will happen. It's our praise team and our choir and all of our musicians joining together. It's going to be at 11 a.m. It's about 30 minutes long. It's a beautiful way to celebrate, I think, this season. It's going to be streamed online, so I'll encourage you to maybe think about joining us online. If you can't come here in person, you can do it online with us. But we just also hope you'll come and join us. We have our regular weekends service this weekend, our schedule, and that is Saturday night at 5:30, Sunday morning at 8, 9:30, then the cantata at 11. We're streaming all of those. And I want to remind you that we are getting ready for Christmas Eve, believe it or not. And we have services on Christmas Eve. And then on Christmas Eve, we're going to have services at 12, 2, 4, 6, and 8. And so we've got a bunch of services for you to pick from. And we hope you'll kind of plan on being with us. There's going to be a special, those of you who are going to worship online with us Christmas Eve, we're going to have a special Christmas Eve online service. So that's going to happen. And all those things are, are part of what will be available for us to celebrate the coming of the light of Christ. And so I want to end with a psalm today. There are a bunch of psalms that connect to this particular scripture. One of them is one of my favorites, which is Psalm 139. And maybe you've read that psalm before. It's got some beautiful images and words, but I always want to share a few with you as we close our time together. If you have a prayer request, by the way, we encourage you can go on our website and leave that. You can put it right there on our Facebook page. It's a great way to, let us know what we can pray for you as we move through this season. And it's kind of I always kind of like for Zachariah and Elizabeth, it's a bittersweet time, for Zachariah, he's excited to have this son, but then he can't talk. And, when we look at this season, there's both joy of, just what Christmas is all about, but also, some deep sorrow, if you will, for many of us who are maybe remembering a loved one during the Christmas season. I've been talking with a number of folks who this is their first Christmas without a loved one who passed during the last year or so. And so, there's kind of both all those things. And this psalm reminds us that God sees us in all of those moments. And so from Psalm 139, I invite you to hear these words as we close. Oh Lord, you have examined my heart. You know everything. You know me. You know when I sit down, when I stand up. You know my thoughts, even when I'm far away. You see me when I travel, when I rest at home. You know everything I do. You know what I'm going to say. Even before I say it, Lord, you go before me. You follow me. You place your hand of blessing on my head. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too great for me to understand. I can never escape from your spirit. I can never get away from your presence. If I go up to heaven, you're there. If I go down to the grave, you're there. If I ride the wings of the morning, if I dwell by the farthest oceans, even there your hand will guide me and your strength will support me. I could ask the darkness to hide me and the light around me to become night. But even in darkness, I cannot hide from you. To you, the night shines as bright as day. Darkness and light are the same. God, you made all the delicate inner parts of my body and you knit me together in my mother's womb. Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous. How well I know it. You watched me as I was being formed in utter seclusion, as I was woven together in the dark of the womb. You saw me before I was born. Every day of my life was recorded in your book. Every moment was laid out before a single day had passed. How precious are your thoughts about me, O God. They cannot be numbered. I can't even count them. They outnumber the grains of sand. And when I wake up, you are still with me. My prayer is that you'll discover God is with you when you're speechless, when you're living into who you think God made you to be, and in those moments where you feel like you can't do what you were made to do, that in the middle of all that, God is longing for us to know he made us to love us. And so my prayer is that just like Zachariah, when he was speechless, he was still faithful. And he did the loving act by caring for his wife and his family, his community, doing his priestly duties. And my prayer is that you'll be able to do that this Christmas season as well. And that you'll notice in those speechless moments how God is at work. Let's bow and let's pray together. God, thank you that you have brought us together as a community in these kind of strange ways during these strange times, being able to connect online like this. God, help us to read these stories about the birth of your son and know that all of them point towards his coming. And as we prepare for that, as we're excited for that during the season of Advent, help prepare our hearts to do the loving thing. And even in the midst of being speechless, God, to reach out to you in loving ways. God, you are a God who loves us each moment, who knows us each moment. And so every moment you are with us, God, help us to claim that, to live that. And God, help us to live out what it means to be your people in speechless ways in the days ahead. God, thank you that you made us to love us and that you know us at every moment. We pray all these things in the name of your Son, the Christ. And the people of God said, wherever they are, amen. Hey, have a great week. We'll look forward to seeing you this weekend in worship. If you're able to join us, I'll be here again next Thursday. Blessings to you. Go in peace.